Justin Simien, you created the Netflix series Dear White People based on your film from 2014, and you also wrote and directed multiple episodes of the series. When you made the film, did you always have in mind, the idea of doing it as a series, or did that come at some point after the film came out?
I had it in the back of my mind. I did. I had toyed with it as a series at some point during its many iterations over the years. And especially when I realized just how much I wasn't going to be able to get into the film, all the storylines and characters. You know, my original conception of it was something much more like Altman than, say, Spike Lee, which is where I feel like we kind of landed, where, Spike Lee has a really lean and mean way to do a multi-protagonist movie, and Altman sort of just lets it just kind of exist for like 3.5 hours with 10,000 characters. That was the first sort of conception of it. And so in the back of my mind, I thought, wow, if, I ever got the chance, it'd be really cool for these characters to live on in some kind of series format, not dissimilar to what they did with MASH. Where you sort of just take the format of that movie and kind of make it episodic. So it was in the back of my mind, and it was something that I was constantly sort of tinkering with and toying with, at night, on my phone, in the back of my head, coming back from Q&As. And when Lionsgate sort of brought me in to ask if it was something I was interested in developing, I incidentally just had been sort of this whole time. So, part of it was organic, and some of it was just something I happened to be thinking about.
What storylines or characters in particular that you didn't have as much time for in the film were you most excited about exploring in the series?
Sure. So specifically, Sam's relationships outside of her movement that she's leading, and outside of her relation, like her, sort of romantic entanglements. So her friendship with Joelle, her friendship with Coco. We kind of alluded to Sam and Troy having a history in the film, and start to kind of go there in the series, and hopefully we'll continue to go there. Probably the biggest one, though, is that there was this sort of massive kind of chunk where my characters were just sort of walking and talking and looking for a good time on campus, and then suddenly are confronted with the fact that as Black kids, they don't get to do the same things as white kids and get the same results. And that scene, because it was so meandering, it just really had no place in the lean and mean 19-day shoot for an hour and 47-minute movie. So that became sort of the beginning of chapter 5, which is sort of, I always sort of envisioned it as like the big sort of midpoint of the first season, that big sort of tonal shift. So that was something I was just sort of dying to put into an episode. And then, really a lot of it is character work. Like, I wanted to know more about Reggie. Al has all sorts of stuff going on that we're just beginning to find out. Lionel, I felt like, has a whole interior life that we didn't really get a chance to explore in the film. So, it was that, plus all of the stories I'd been hearing from students and faculty members, and just audiences from touring with the film.
You mentioned, Chapter 5, that's a major turning point episode, addresses an encounter with campus police, and that's directed by Oscar winner Barry Jenkins, that episode, and it really sets up a lot of course, the story for the rest of the season. What was it like, what were your thoughts, initially going into tackling that storyline, working with Barry Jenkins, and then balancing that tone throughout the rest of the season with that, really intense topic?
Sure. Well, I knew that we had to do it. I just felt like we would be irresponsible not to address that. And it just felt like so much of the Black experience for me has been, we have these conversations kind of in a vacuum, and we talk about, rights and racism and all this stuff in a very like intelligent way. And then there's always those moments that just hit you viscerally. And there is no argument. There is no, intellectual comeback that sort of suffices in that moment. It just hits you that there are limits to your experience as an American because of the color of your skin, and there's really nothing you can do in the immediate moment about that. And I just wanted that to come as much of a shock to the audience as it does to us when it happens. It's sort of like we plant the seeds, that something like that could happen in this world, but you don't think exactly we're gonna go there. And especially not in this episode that's just sort of a walk and talk, and it's fun, and it's the kids going to parties, and we're fly on the walls of all these great conversations. so that was something that I was pretty clear about, and felt really confident that we could do it, even though the tone shifts so dramatically. And the Barry Jenkins part, you know, I was a fan of his since Medicine for Melancholy. And, you know, really seeing what he was doing as a filmmaker was so inspirational for me as I was still writing and developing Dear White People. And we sort of became Twitter friends. And when he started to show people Moonlight for their feedback, he DM'd me and was like, yo, do you want to come through? And I was like, yeah, I'm there. Where are we going? What are we watching? And, you know, I got to saw his beautiful movie, Moonlight, and talk to him and become his friend. And, you know, when I sort of started to put it all together and realize, okay, well, you know, there are limits to how much I can direct a show that I've created. He was one of those people that I was like, gosh, I really want to collaborate with him on this, because I really want people, and all of my directors are like this, but I really want people who understand cinema, not just visual storytelling, not just sort of replicating what the pilot director did, but people who can sort of interpret the story through their own cinematic lens and show me something as a creator that I didn't even see before. And I thought that, you know, Barry would be one of those people. And I don't think the world knew what Moonlight was going to be, but I knew. And I knew that, you know, this show would come out in a world after Moonlight, and that was also just very exciting for me.
The format of the series is a little different from the film, of course, by necessity. And in the series, you know, you kind of focus on a different character in each episode. How did you decide to frame the series in that way?
That came pretty early on. You know, I'm always looking for a way to experiment with the form just a little bit. And one of the things that I love, you know, multi-protagonist films, that is my jam. That is my sweet spot. And I wanted to try to find a way to sort of translate that experience into episodic, which to me seems like such an easy crossover, but it's really just now where we're beginning to kind of break those barriers of what a pilot episode is and what the format of a show is. I felt like, particularly in a Netflix environment where you're meant to binge the whole thing at once, let's treat it, really treat it, not just say we're treating it this way, but actually treat it like a 5-hour single piece of something, and then split that up into essentially short films about these characters who are united by place, united by time, united by, you know, sort of their shared opposition in the world of Winchester, but really like go and do deep dives into their specific lives as, you know, the sort of like overarching, you know, plot sort of comes to a boil. So that was something I had pretty early on, and especially when really it was the audience that articulated for me. In Q&As, talking to people, what we always feel and what I always feel when I see that one thing about people of color that comes out that year, the one or two things that come out, it's like, gosh, I want more. And I wanted to put as many stories and as many characters in this piece as I could. I didn't want it to just come from one character's point of view or center around one character's actions. So that was something I was sort of playing with in my head and sort of watching in my head, you know, oh, would I follow that? And would I like that? And would I watch that? So by the time it was a real thing and we were in the writer's room, that was a pretty, like, I wasn't negotiating that. That was something I knew that I wanted to do, and I knew that we could accomplish.
Now, you mentioned, you know, people of color, we don't often get like to see a broad kind of a spectrum of representation on screen, and what one of the things that Dear White People does in the film as well as the series is show us that, you know, the quote unquote Black experience is actually, you know, encompasses a number of Black experiences, and we actually get to see you know, more of those experiences on screen. Were there perspectives in particular that you especially wanted to highlight that you thought were maybe underrepresented in general in film and TV?
Well, certainly, like, you know, when you're talking about the intersections of Black and gay, I think we have one or two flavors of that we just get served over and over again. And I think that, you know, in my upbringing, if I had a Lionel in the culture, I think my childhood would have been a little bit easier, frankly. But I also think that, you know, when we're at the intersection of Black and, say, you know, white, in the case of Sam, who's multiracial, or, you know, the intersection of Black and female, like Sam, but also like Coco. Again, those are things that are commonly sort of treated with a really sort of soft touch, or something is said and then we sort of move on. But the intricacies of those experiences, I just wanted to go as deep as I could. And also the idea of masculinity, because even, though I would say that there are probably more Black men in the culture than there are, Black women sort of representations. Black masculinity is also something that is often projected as one idea or one type of guy, one type of way of being a Black man. And with Reggie and Troy, I wanted to get past that and go deeper into that experience, because that also is a box. Whenever you are sort of constantly being told by the culture that you have to be this thing because nothing else is sort of there, everything else that might be like you is absent from the culture, it puts you in a box. And I wanted to explore the edges of those boxes that we find ourselves in.
And you mentioned, some of these characters, Lionel, who's trying to belong as a Black man and a gay man, and Sam is very confrontational, and Troy and Coco are a lot of times more about assimilation and working within the system. Do you think there's a character, you mentioned being able to relate to Lionel, but is that the character you relate to the most, maybe, or is there a bit of you in all of these characters?
I think so. I mean, there is a bit of me in all these characters. I mean, they really represent me at different stages of my life, different ways in which I sort of negotiated what Blackness meant with the outside culture in order to, achieve at work or to make friends or, whatever the case may be. I sort of played all of those roles at a certain point. But at the end of the day, the awkwardness that is Lionel is sort of something I don't think I'll ever quite shake. The sort of feeling that I don't really belong in any of the places that are available to me, that I have to just sort of kind of straddle them. I think that's something that I've certainly carried with me into adulthood, and I can only imagine I'll continue to carry it with me. But I also relate to Sam and feeling like I felt like this need to sort of build a soapbox, but now, can I get off it? Do I have to stay on it? Do I have to keep saying the same thing I was saying 2 years ago? I certainly relate to that struggle as well.
One of the interesting things from the film to the series is that you're working with a lot of the same actors, but also some new additions, like Logan Browning, who's playing Sam White, who's previously played by Tessa Thompson. Did you approach any of those characters differently when working, with a different actor in the roles? Did the roles kind of transform for you in a way?
Well, I think you have to. I mean, I really, as a filmmaker, as much as I love the visual language of film and cinema as an art form, I also just really love collaborating with actors because they are, most of what you're shooting is them, is their faces, their performances. So I think if I wasn't the kind of director who adjusted to each actor, I don't think I'd be a great director. I think part of what I do is to sort of listen and take in what that actor is giving me, what parts of that actor are sort of meshing with the character, what parts of that actor are fighting the character. And that's kind of the space that I live in as a director. And so naturally, because it's new energy, it's new bodies, it's new mindsets, new points of views, inhabiting these characters that I've only created on the page, it changes. It just sort of organically changes a bit. I don't know that there was like a conscious sort of, well, let's shift this character, let's change this character for the series, as much as it was like, well, let's accentuate like the best of Logan, the best of Antoinette, the best of Deron Horton. And they've got so many great things to offer, by the way, and not make them feel like they have to just sort of do impersonations of the actors that portrayed the characters before them. I definitely wanted to free them of any notion that they were chasing someone else's performance. I didn't think that would be helpful or interesting to watch, really.
Before the series even premiered this spring, a lot of the usual internet trolls were up in arms over the show, just based on, I think, just the first trailer. So did that thwart your big plans for White Genocide?
Yeah, they found out about it. It meant it as a sneak attack, obviously, and they got me. So what can I say? Caught me red-handed. No, I mean, listen, I think we're in an age where particularly people on the right who maybe don't have the strongest of arguments or the soundest of ideologies, they need things to sort of build outrage around. And it just so happened that even though the concept of Dear White People has literally been around since 2013, they felt like enough people didn't know about it that they could sort of create new outrage out of it. And they did so incredibly successfully. They got a lot of people upset. And I think, of course, if you think this show is a call for white genocide, you know, you think, you know, what are they doing? The world's going crazy. But of course, it's not the show that I made. That was never my intent, and I don't even really think that the title sort of insinuates that. But you know, they got their jollies off, and like I said, you really know you're doing something right when you face that kind of adversity. And I said this before, I'll say it again, it was an honor. It was an honor to be greeted with that kind of animus, because these are not people I respect. Not the people who were whipped up by it, but the people who were doing the whipping, you know, like the David Dukes of the world who were making videos about what we're doing. Those are people I respect. Those are people who I think are part of the problem. So if they're coming for me, you know, check.
The title of the show is Dear White People, and even though, of course, it's not centering the experiences of white characters, is there anything in particular you maybe would like white viewers to take away from the series? If they're maybe not, you know, the white genocide camp, but or just maybe a little bit more defensive when, you know, the topic of racism kind of comes up?
I mean, I would say that I get it, because especially in this time of tit for tat and what we call conversation, but it's really just sort of like Twitter beefing. It's easy to sort of feel attacked, especially with a show that has a title that's very memeable. You know, Dear White People is a very meme kind of title. But the show isn't about attacking anybody or making, you know, a group of people feel solely responsible for the state of our nation. This is really a show about characters who feel as if their entire being has to constantly be in response to whiteness. That is what it feels like to be a Black person. And that doesn't mean that you are solely responsible for that. But I think that, one, the show is just a fun show. And so I think you'll enjoy just sort of following these characters and their journeys. But also, two, we're all sort of bamboozled by this thing called race, and by these things that supposedly divide us, and by the ideas that we're sort of taught by our parents, who were taught by their parents, who were taught by their parents, who were taught by their parents. We're all adversely affected by these things. And Dear White People really is an invitation to have a conversation, and in a judgment-free zone where you get to also watch really beautiful people banter and like have sex and like go about the soap opera life of being young and in college. So come join the party.
Speaking of the state of the nation, you know, just in the time between the film in 2014 coming out and now the series, you know, the film came out in the age of Barack Obama, when, of course, we were post-racial and racism was solved. Sure. And then, of course, you know, the series is coming out, you know, with the rise of Trumpism. Like, how does that change kind of the dynamic of the show, even in interacting with this national conversation?
Well, I think it unfortunately means that a lot of people are more defensive, just by nature. And I think that, you know, everything is just more heightened, but it also makes the show more urgent. It makes it, you know, it makes it, for me, obvious that we need to have this conversation. These are the kind of conversations that we like to avoid and that are easy to avoid, unless you happen to be Black or, you know, any kind of marginalized group of society. But it's the fact that we've been putting off these conversations that have put us in this situation in the first place. I hope that it is clear to more Americans than ever was before how American racism against Black people can actually affect the entire globe. It can put people in office who don't belong there. It can sort of jeopardize your health care. It can sort of jeopardize your livelihood in very real and tangible ways. And if you aren't a Black person that's experiencing oppression, I guarantee you the oppression that we are experiencing is affecting you negatively in ways that you can both see and ways that you can't. So there's a matter of urgency to having this conversation now. And again, you know, we provide a safe space in Dear White People for everybody. This is a show that is about empathy, and it's about sort of characters. It's not about dogma. It's not about ideology.
Now, I don't know if the show has been officially renewed for a second season yet. I certainly hope so, knock on wood. But do you have plans for a second season, or, you know, ideas in your mind about where that would go?
Of course I do. I can't turn this thing off, man. So I'm thinking about season 3, season 4 right now. But you know, I'm eagerly anticipating that phone call. And the second they tell me go, we're going to go. We got a lot more to say.
Well, I want to congratulate you again on the series and wish you the best of luck with hopefully a season 2, a season 4, a season 24 down the line, and you best of luck hopefully at the Emmys as well this summer.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you talking to me.